Beneath Japan's mountains, something is being carved that shouldn't exist. American intelligence has no idea. Japanese citizens hear only rumors. But in sealed military chambers, generals whisper about a fortress that could turn the entire nation into a tomb. One that America would enter, but never leave. The war is ending. Everyone knows it, except the men drilling tunnels into solid rock. They're preparing for a war that hasn't started yet. A war beneath the earth. And if their plan succeeds, the invasion of Japan won't be measured in weeks, it will be measured in years. In millions dead. This is the story of the fortress America never fought. Because history took a different, terrible turn. Summer of 1945. Silence. Japan goes dark. Not metaphorically, literally dark. Cities burn under American bombers. Radio transmissions crackle with defeat. Naval bases report no ships remaining. Air Command reports no planes. The Emperor's Palace receives reports from the front lines, but there are no front lines anymore. Just ashes. General Anami reads another intelligence report from Okinawa. He studies the casualty figures carefully. His face remains stone, but his jaw clenches. One phrase keeps appearing in American intercepts. They fought from caves. They fought from tunnels. They wouldn't stop. Some generals see Okinawa as a defeat. Others see it as a demonstration. These reports don't just describe a lost battle. They describe a new kind of warfare. And one general is already imagining something the Americans can't possibly expect. What his planning terrifies even his own staff. The high command gathers in a sealed military chamber. Maps cover the walls, but these aren't battle maps anymore. These are geological surveys. Mountain ranges. Cave systems. Elevation charts. Structural engineering reports. Japan should be preparing surrender documents. Should be calculating terms. Should be accepting the inevitable. But these men aren't discussing surrender. General Umezu speaks first. He's in charge of the Army General Staff. He says American invasion is coming, but he doesn't say they should negotiate. The other generals lean forward. What's the plan? How do we defend? Where do we make our stand? Umezu's answer shocks everyone. Everywhere. Beneath everything. Forever. The room goes silent. Nobody speaks because this isn't a defense plan. It's a promise of national suicide dressed as strategy. But then someone asks the question that changes everything. How deep can we dig? After how deep can we dig? Immediate transition. To understand why these generals would even ask that question, you have to understand how completely Japan's situation had collapsed by 1945. To understand why these generals would even ask that question, you have to understand how completely Japan's situation had collapsed by 1945. The Imperial Japanese Navy, once the pride of the Pacific, didn't exist anymore. Not in any meaningful way. Most of it sat at the bottom of the ocean. The carriers that struck Pearl Harbor? Gone. The battleships that symbolized imperial power? Sunk or crippled. What remained hid in ports, unable to venture out without being obliterated. The Air Force was worse. Japan had maybe a few hundred operational aircraft left. Not thousands. Hundreds. Pilots with weeks of training instead of years flew planes held together with spare parts and desperation. American bombers flew over Japanese cities unopposed, turning them into infernos night after night. Tokyo burned. Osaka burned. Nagoya burned. And the people watched it happen. But here's what matters. They didn't break. Japanese propaganda didn't talk about winning anymore. It talked about honor. About duty. About sacrifice for the emperor. Citizens practiced with bamboo spears. Teenagers trained for suicide attacks. Families prepared to fight in their own streets. The government wasn't hiding defeat, it was reframing it. Better death than dishonor. In the sealed military chambers, generals faced a psychological crisis more than a strategic one. Surrender meant humiliation. It meant trials. It meant the emperor, considered divine, might be harmed or arrested. It meant everything their culture had built for centuries would be dismantled by foreign powers. So they made a choice. If America wanted Japan, they would give them Japan, every inch of it. But they'd make every inch cost blood. That's when Operation Ketsugo was born. Not as a military strategy. As a national vow. Japan would become a battlefield. The entire country. Surface and beneath. And if they couldn't win, they'd make sure America would never forget the cost of victory. The meetings happened in rooms most Japanese citizens didn't know existed. Underground chambers beneath military headquarters. Windowless offices sealed from the outside world. Maps spread across tables showing not just coastlines, but topography, elevation, cave systems, rock density. These weren't invasion defense maps. These were something else entirely. General Umezu stood at the head of the table. His voice was calm, but his words were apocalyptic. We cannot defeat them on the beaches. We cannot defeat them in the air. We cannot defeat them at sea. So we will not fight them there. He paused, letting that sink in. We will fight them everywhere else. The plan took shape in those shadowed rooms. Japan wouldn't just defend, it would become defense itself. The beaches were obvious targets, so they'd fortify them. But that was just the beginning. American troops would land, push inland, and then discover the real war hadn't even started. Forests would hide soldiers. Cities would become killing zones. Mountains would conceal artillery. And beneath it all, tunnels. Miles of tunnels. The philosophy was brutal in its simplicity. America might have more planes, more ships, more bombs. But Japan had terrain, population, and willingness to sacrifice both. One general put it plainly, they can destroy our military. They cannot destroy our will. The goal wasn't victory. Not anymore. The goal was cost. Make invasion so expensive in American lives that their public would demand negotiations. Make every mile of Japanese soil cost 1,000 casualties. Make the war drag on month after month until political pressure forced a conditional peace. It was a gamble built on horror. Prolong the war. Bleed them endlessly. Break their resolve before they break ours. And to make that possible, they'd need something unprecedented. A nation that could fight even after its surface was conquered. They'd need to build Japan. Twice. The sound was deafening. Pickaxes striking stone. Explosives echoing through mountain chambers. Drill bits screaming as they bored through solid rock. And beneath it all, the constant rhythm of thousands of laborious digging, hauling, carving a hidden world into existence. Mountains across Japan were being hollowed out. In Nagano Prefecture, crews worked on the Matsushiro complex, the crown jewel of the underground empire. This wasn't a bunker. It was a subterranean capital. Miles of interconnected tunnels. Command centers reinforced with concrete and steel. Communication rooms. Meeting halls. Storage depots. An entire government complex designed to function beneath the earth while the world above burned. The emperor himself could rule from here. Protected by hundreds of feet of solid rock. Unreachable by bombs. Hidden from American intelligence. But Matsushiro was just one site. Across the country, similar projects took shape. Artillery positions carved into cliffsides, invisible until they opened fire. Underground hospitals with surgical theaters lit by generators. Secret escape routes connecting fortifications. Command bunkers so deep that collapse would take direct nuclear hits. And the people building them were breaking. Soldiers worked until exhaustion, then worked more. Civilians mobilized by force dug through darkness with minimal tools. Thousands of Korean and Chinese laborists, brought against their will, suffered the worst conditions. Inadequate food, brutal hours, cave-ins that buried dozens at a time. Many died in those tunnels. Their bodies sometimes left where they fell because there was no time for proper burial. The work couldn't stop. Guards stood watch at every entrance. Secrecy was absolute. Locals knew something was happening in the mountains, but asking questions was dangerous. Engineers worked from incomplete plans, knowing only their small section. Even government officials remained ignorant of the full scope. Above ground, Japan appeared to be a dying nation. Below ground, a second Japan was being born, darker, hidden, and prepared to fight until nothing remained. While Japan carved its underground empire, The rest of the world saw only the surface. American bombers flew over Japanese cities, photographing the devastation below. Intelligence analysts studied the images carefully, destroyed factories, burned neighborhoods, collapsed infrastructure. They saw a nation on its knees. They didn't see what was beneath it. U.S. military planners knew Japan would defend its homeland. They expected fortified beaches, entrenched positions, fanatical resistance. Their invasion plans, Operation Downfall, accounted for heavy casualties. Estimates ranged from hundreds of thousands to over 1 million American deaths. But those estimates were based on conventional warfare. Nobody in Washington understood they were planning to invade two Japans, one visible, one hidden. American reconnaissance flights captured images of mountain regions. Analysts noted increased activity around certain areas. Supply convoys heading into remote locations. But the scale? The depth? The interconnected network of fortifications stretching beneath entire prefectures? Invisible. Even ordinary Japanese citizens didn't grasp the full picture. They knew about coastal defenses. They'd been told to prepare for invasion. But the underground headquarters? The subterranean command centers? The miles of hidden tunnels? Rumors, nothing more. Villagers near construction sites whispered about strange sounds in the mountains at night. Workers who emerged from the tunnels looked exhausted, traumatized. But asking direct questions invited suspicion. So people stayed quiet and wondered. The truth was terrifying. The greatest battlefield of World War II was being built in absolute secrecy. And by the time American troops would have discovered it, landing on beaches, pushing inland, encountering the first hidden positions, it would already be too late to adjust strategy. Japan wasn't just defending territory anymore. It was defending depth. Surface invasion could capture cities, but the war wouldn't end there. It would continue beneath their feet. In darkness. In tunnels. In fortresses carved from stone. A war without front lines. Without clear targets. A war that could last forever. The tunnels were only half the plan. The other half was people. Every single one of them. Across Japan, the government launched a mobilization unlike anything seen before. Not just soldiers, everyone. Men too old for military service trained with whatever weapons remained. Teenagers drilled in schoolyards, learning to throw grenades and charge enemy positions. Women practiced first aid, but also combat techniques. The message was clear: when invasion comes, there are no civilians. In parks and fields, citizens trained with bamboo spears. Not as a joke, as genuine weapons. The government distributed millions of them. Instructions were blunt. Aim for the throat, the eyes, the stomach. American soldiers would have rifles and armor, but numbers could overwhelm technology. That was the theory. Propaganda posters covered every wall. 100 million die together. Not a threat, a promise. The psychological preparation was just as intense as the physical. Radio broadcasts repeated the same themes. Honor over survival, duty over self, the emperor's divine mission. Surrender wasn't just defeat, it was spiritual annihilation. Better to die fighting than live in shame. But beneath the patriotic rhetoric, terror spread. Some believed what they were told. They genuinely saw this as noble sacrifice. Others were terrified but trapped. Speaking doubt meant betrayal, and betrayal meant death. Families huddled together at night, wondering if they'd die on beaches or in their own streets. Mothers looked at their children and wondered how to protect them when protection was no longer the goal. The emotional conflict was unbearable. Pride mixed with fear. Loyalty tangled with survival instinct. And overriding everything, the crushing weight of circumstances too large for any individual to escape. Japan wasn't just preparing soldiers anymore. It was preparing millions of souls for a collective death. And if American forces landed, they wouldn't be fighting an army. They'd be fighting an entire nation convinced that dying was better than losing. Across the Pacific, American military planners faced their own nightmare. Operation Downfall, the invasion of Japan, would be the largest amphibious assault in human history. It would make D-Day look small by comparison. 2 phases, Operation Olympic, targeting the southern island of Kyushu in November 1945, followed by Operation Coronet, the assault on Tokyo itself in March 1946. The numbers were staggering. Over 1 million American troops. Thousands of ships. Complete air superiority. An invasion force so massive it would take months just to position everyone. Victory seemed inevitable. But the cost? Military analysts ran casualty projections. The estimates were horrifying. Some predicted 500,000 American deaths. Others said closer to 1 million. Total casualties, American and Japanese combined, could reach into the millions. Perhaps tens of millions. President Truman received these reports personally. He read them carefully. The weight of those numbers sat heavy on every decision he made. American commanders felt confident they could win. They'd defeated Germany. They'd conquered island after island across the Pacific. Japan's military was shattered. Its cities were burning. How much longer could they really hold out? But mixed with that confidence was dread. Intelligence reports from Okinawa described fighting unlike anything previously encountered. Japanese soldiers hiding in caves, emerging at night, refusing surrender even when surrounded. Civilians throwing themselves off cliffs rather than face capture. It took nearly 3 months to secure one island. Now multiply that by an entire nation. Still, American planners prepared for conventional warfare. Fortified beaches. Urban combat. Entrenched soldiers. Their maps showed coastal defenses, military installations, strategic cities. What their maps didn't show was what waited beneath. They were planning to invade one Japan. They had no idea a second Japan, hidden, fortified, prepared to fight from underground, was waiting in the darkness. And that blind spot could have cost millions of lives. By late July 1945, everything was in place. The tunnels were ready. Command centers operational. Artillery hidden in mountain stone. Underground hospitals stocked with supplies. Millions of civilians trained and mobilized. The Matsushiro complex, Japan's subterranean capital, stood prepared to receive the emperor and his staff. Japan waited. American invasion fleets gathered across the Pacific. Troops rehearsed amphibious landings. Generals finalized attack plans. The date was set, November 1945. Operation Olympic would begin the largest and bloodiest campaign in military history. Both sides prepared for Armageddon. Then, on August 6th, the world changed. Hiroshima disappeared in a flash of light. A single bomb erased an entire city in seconds. The reports reaching Tokyo were incomprehensible. One plane, one bomb, 70,000 dead instantly. Japanese high command struggled to process it. Some thought it was exaggeration. Others suspected a trick. But the evidence was undeniable. A weapon beyond anything they'd planned for had just been unleashed. 3 days later, Nagasaki. Another city. Another flash. Another impossible calculation of death. The underground fortresses, built to withstand conventional invasion, suddenly seemed meaningless. What good were mountain tunnels against weapons that could erase cities in single strikes? How could Japan fight a prolonged resistance when its population could be obliterated prefecture by prefecture? On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito's voice crackled across Japan's radios. The first time most citizens had ever heard him speak. His message was clear. The war was over. Japan would surrender unconditionally. In the Matsushiro tunnels, generals stood in darkness. The command centers they'd built to direct a final stand would never be used. The weapons carved into stone would never fire. The resistance that was supposed to bleed America for years ended before it began. The tunnels fell silent. The greatest battle of World War II, the one that could have killed millions, never happened. History had taken a different, terrible turn. For decades, the tunnels remained sealed. Forgotten. Hidden behind overgrown vegetation and rusted gates. Then researchers began finding them. In Matsushiro, explorers ventured into the mountain complex with flashlights. What they discovered was haunting. Miles of corridors carved through solid rock, now silent and abandoned. Wooden supports rotted in the damp air. Command rooms sat empty, their maps and equipment long removed. Communication cables dangled from ceilings, leading nowhere. These weren't just military ruins. They were time capsules of desperation. Historians interviewed survivors, the soldiers, laborists, and civilians who'd built these fortresses. Their testimonies were consistent: fear, exhaustion, secrecy. Many worked in darkness for months, never understanding the full scope of what they were creating. Some described cave-ins that killed dozens. Others remembered the crushing psychological weight of building something they hoped would never be used. One former laborer said it plainly: "We were digging our own graves and calling them fortresses." Today, remnants of Japan's underground empire still exist across the country. Tourist groups walk through preserved sections of Matsushiro. Historians catalogue forgotten tunnels. Local communities debate what to do with these spaces: preserve them as warnings or seal them forever. Because that's what these tunnels really are: warnings. Not monuments to military power. Not symbols of courage or honor. Warnings about how close humanity came to unleashing something unspeakable. If those atomic bombs hadn't been dropped, if Operation Downfall had proceeded, these tunnels would have become the stage for catastrophe beyond measure. History ended before this plan was tested. But the silent tunnels remain, dark, cold, empty, whispering what could have been. They remind us how thin the line is between the world we know and the one we narrowly avoided. Between survival and absolute devastation. The fortresses America never knew still wait in the mountains. Silent ghosts of a war that never was.